I found my son sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were empty. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Rebecca says I need to choose between you and my family." The coffee cup I was holding slipped from my fingers, shattering against the tile floor, but I barely heard it. My name is Brenda, and I never thought I'd become the villain in my own son's life. For 32 years, I poured everything I had into raising Cameron. I was there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every triumph. I worked 2 jobs after his father died when Cameron was just 7, making sure he had everything he needed. I went without so he could have better. And now, at 63 years old, I was being erased from his life like I never mattered at all. It started small, the way poison always does. Rebecca came into our lives 3 years ago, all smiles and sweetness. She was beautiful, successful, everything I'd hoped my son would find. I welcomed her with open arms, treated her like the daughter I never had. I remember the first time Cameron brought her home for Sunday dinner, how she'd complimented my pot roast, how she'd laughed at my stories, how she'd squeezed my hand and told me she was so glad Cameron had such a wonderful mother. I'd felt this warm glow in my chest, this sense that my son had finally found someone who understood the importance of family. But within months of their wedding, things began to shift. Family dinners became less frequent. Phone calls grew shorter. When I'd stop by their house unannounced, the way I'd done for years, Rebecca would answer the door with a tight smile and explain that it wasn't a good time. The first few times I brushed it off. People need privacy, I told myself. They're newlyweds. But then the pattern continued, and each rejection felt like a small cut, shallow but stinging. "She's just adjusting to married life," my sister Fiona told me over coffee one afternoon at our usual cafe downtown. Fiona had always been the practical one, the voice of reason in our family. She stirred her latte and gave me that look, the one that said I was overthinking things. "Give her space, Brenda. You can be a bit intense sometimes." I remember how those words stung, how I'd driven home in silence, wondering if I really was the problem. Was I too involved? Too caring? Had I somehow crossed a line I didn't even know existed? I started second-guessing every interaction, every text message I sent to Cameron, every attempt to see my granddaughter Sophie. The self-doubt crept in like fog, thick and disorienting. I began keeping a journal around that time, trying to make sense of what was happening. I'd write down every interaction, analyzing my words, my actions, trying to find the moment where I'd gone wrong. Page after page filled with questions. Did I overstep when I bought Sophie that stuffed elephant? Was I wrong to suggest that pediatrician when she had a fever? Should I have waited to be invited instead of assuming I was welcome? The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in October. Cameron had invited me for dinner, something that had become rare enough to feel like a special occasion. I'd made his favorite apple pie, the one with the lattice crust he'd loved since childhood. I'd spent hours on it, making sure every detail was perfect, the crust golden brown, the apples sweetened just right with cinnamon and a hint of nutmeg. But when I arrived at their beautiful suburban home, the one I'd helped them with the down payment for, Rebecca greeted me at the door with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger exactly. It was colder than that. It was dismissal. "Brenda," she said, "not Mom, not even a warm hello. Just my name, flat and final. We need to talk." Cameron stood behind her in the hallway, and I'll never forget the look on his face. Guilt, shame, resignation, all mixed together in a way that made my stomach drop. This wasn't a dinner invitation. This was an ambush. I could smell my apple pie growing cold in my hands, could feel the warmth of it through the dish towel, and suddenly it felt heavy, like I was carrying something much more burdensome than dessert. We sat in their living room, me on one side, the two of them on the other like prosecutors at a trial. Rebecca did most of the talking. She had a list actually written down on her phone of everything I'd apparently done wrong. I'd given unsolicited parenting advice when their daughter Sophie was born. I'd shown up uninvited too many times. I'd made comments about Rebecca's cooking, her decorating choices, her career. Each accusation hit me like a physical blow. And the worst part was that Cameron just sat there, nodding along, saying nothing in my defense. Some of the accusations were based on things I barely remembered saying. A casual comment about how I used to dress Cameron in warmer clothes during winter had somehow become me criticizing Rebecca's parenting. A suggestion to try a different brand of diapers when Sophie had a rash had been interpreted as me undermining Rebecca's decisions. A compliment about the house's potential had been twisted into me insulting her decorating taste. "You're suffocating us," Rebecca said, her voice steady and rehearsed. I could tell she'd practiced this speech probably multiple times. Cameron needs space to be his own man, to build his own family. And honestly, Brenda, your constant presence is damaging our marriage. I looked at my son, this man I'd sacrificed everything for, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he just stared at his hands, those hands I'd held when he learned to walk, that I'd bandaged when he fell off his bike, that I'd watched grow from small and soft to large and capable. "Mom," he finally whispered, and his voice cracked on that single word. "Maybe it's best if we take a break for a while. Just give us some space." "A break," I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Cameron, I'm your mother, not your girlfriend. You don't take breaks from your mother." "Please," he said, and now he was looking at me with eyes that seemed to beg for understanding. "Just for a little while. Let us figure things out." "How long is a little while?" I asked, my voice stronger than I felt. Rebecca and Cameron exchanged a glance, and then Rebecca spoke. "We'll reach out when we're ready. It might be a few months. It might be longer. We need you to respect that boundary." I drove home that night in a daze, tears blurring the road in front of me. The apple pie sat on the passenger seat, untouched, mocking me with its perfection. When I got to my small apartment, the one I'd moved into after selling the family home to help Cameron with his house, I sat in the dark for hours. The silence was deafening. No goodnight calls from Cameron. No photos of little Sophie lighting up my phone. Just emptiness. I threw the pie in the trash, dish and all. I couldn't bear to look at it. The next 6 months were the darkest of my life. Cameron stopped returning my calls. My texts went unanswered. When I tried to visit, no one answered the door, even though I could see their cars in the driveway. I missed Sophie's 3rd birthday. I sent a card and a gift, but I never knew if she received it. There was no thank you, no acknowledgement that I existed. I missed Thanksgiving. That was particularly brutal. Thanksgiving had always been our holiday, the one day when the whole family gathered at my table. I'd been hosting Thanksgiving dinner for 35 years. But that year, I sat alone in my apartment with a frozen turkey dinner for one, watching the parade on television and crying into my mashed potatoes. Christmas came and went without a word from my only child. I'd bought presents for everyone, wrapped them carefully written heartfelt cards. They sat under my small tree gathering dust. On Christmas morning, I woke up to complete silence. No excited call from Sophie about her presents. No FaceTime session to show me what Santa brought. Nothing. I felt like I was grieving someone who was still alive, and in some ways that was worse than death. When my husband Richard died, I'd had closure. There was a funeral, a mourning period, a clear ending. But this was ambiguous loss, a grief that had no resolution, no ritual, no acknowledgement from the world. People would ask me how Cameron was doing, and I'd have to smile and say he's fine, because I was too ashamed to admit that my own son had cut me out of his life. If you're liking this story so far, please hit that like button. Means more than you know. My sister Fiona tried to comfort me, but even she seemed to think I should just accept it. "Maybe they need this time," she'd say, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "Maybe you were a bit too involved. Give them space and they'll come back." But as weeks turned into months, I stopped believing that. I stopped believing in a lot of things during that time. I questioned whether I'd been a good mother, whether my love had somehow been toxic, whether everything I thought I knew about family and relationships was wrong. I stopped sleeping well. Food lost its taste. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, my heart pounding, wondering what I'd done that was so terrible I deserved to be cut out of my son's life. I replayed every interaction with Rebecca, every conversation, looking for the moment I'd ruined everything. Was it when I'd suggested she try my recipe for pot roast? Was it when I'd bought Sophie that toy without asking first? Was it simply that I existed? My coworkers at the library where I worked part-time noticed the change in me. Martha, who'd worked at the circulation desk for 20 years, pulled me aside one day in February. "Brenda, honey, what's going on? You've lost weight. You look exhausted." I broke down right there in the staff room, telling her everything. Martha listened, her kind face creased with concern, and when I finished, she said something that stuck with me. A woman who cuts a grandmother out of a child's life is either protecting that child from harm, or she's got something to hide. And you're not harmful, Brenda. So what's she hiding? That question lodged itself in my brain. What was Rebecca hiding? Why had she worked so hard to isolate Cameron from me? It couldn't just be about space or boundaries. There had to be more to it. I started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. I followed Rebecca's social media, which she'd never blocked me from, probably because she wanted to maintain the appearance of a normal relationship to the outside world. Her posts were all carefully curated perfection. Beautiful photos of their house, exotic vacations, designer handbags, expensive dinners. For a couple where Cameron worked as a high school teacher and Rebecca was a mid-level marketing manager, they seemed to be living well beyond their means. Then, in March, everything changed. I was at the grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon, pushing my cart down the cereal aisle, when I heard a voice I recognized. It was Rebecca's mother, Judith, a woman I'd met only a handful of times at family gatherings. She seemed nice enough, though always a bit distant. She was talking to another woman, and they hadn't seen me yet. I stopped, pretending to examine a box of granola, my heart suddenly pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. I told Rebecca she was being too harsh, Judith was saying, her voice carrying over the canned music playing through the store's speakers. That woman raised Cameron alone after her husband died. She worked herself to the bone for that boy. But Rebecca, she's always been territorial. She doesn't want to share Cameron with anyone, not even his own mother. That's sad, the other woman replied, her tone sympathetic. Family is everything. I know, Judith continued, and I inched closer, my cart forgotten. And now with the inheritance situation, I told Rebecca she needs to make amends before it's too late. But she won't listen. She's convinced she can just wait it out, that Cameron's mother will eventually give up or, well, her voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Or die. That's what she meant. Rebecca was waiting for me to die. What inheritance? The other woman asked, and I held my breath. Oh, it's substantial from what I understand, Judith said. Something from Cameron's late father that's been in trust or something. Rebecca found out about it somehow, did some digging. She thinks if she can keep Cameron separated from his mother long enough, they'll have a better position when the money comes through. It's terrible. I didn't raise my daughter to be like this, but she's got these money problems she won't even tell Cameron about, and she's desperate. The women moved on, their voices fading as they turned the corner into the next aisle. I stood there, frozen, my hands gripping the cart handle so tightly my knuckles turned white. Inheritance? Money problems? My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I just heard. What inheritance? My late husband Richard had left us with barely enough to cover his funeral costs. We'd been drowning in debt after his death. I'd worked myself nearly to exhaustion for years just to keep us afloat, to make sure Cameron could go to college without crushing student loans. I lived on a modest pension and the small savings I hadn't given to Cameron. What were they talking about? I didn't approach them. Instead, I abandoned my cart right there in the aisle and walked out of the store, my mind spinning with questions. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what Judith had said. An inheritance from Richard? How could that be possible? The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my late husband's brother, Theodore, who lived upstate. Uncle Theodore had always been the family historian, the keeper of records and old documents. He was a retired accountant, meticulous and organized, the kind of man who filed everything in color-coded folders. Brenda, he said warmly when he answered. I've been meaning to call you. How are you holding up? I heard through the family grapevine that things have been rough. We talked for a while about everything and nothing. Theodore told me about his new hobby, woodworking, about the birdhouse he just finished. I told him about the library, about the book club I joined. Normal, surface-level conversation. And then I asked him something that had been nagging at me since I'd overheard Judith. Theodore, did Richard ever mention anything about investments? Or property? Anything he might have set aside? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, could almost see him adjusting his glasses the way he always did when he was thinking. You don't know, do you? My heart started racing. No, what? Brenda, Richard had a life insurance policy. A big one. He also had some investments that matured over the years. And there was that land his father left him upstate, the 50 acres near the lake. It's worth quite a bit now, especially with all the development in that area. I felt the room start to spin. I sat down heavily on my couch, the phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. Theodore, what are you talking about? Richard died with debts. We had nothing. I worked myself to exhaustion because we had nothing. That's what he wanted you to think, Theodore said gently, and I could hear the apology in his voice. He didn't want you to know about the money while he was alive, because he knew you'd insist on using it for daily expenses. You know how you are, Brenda, always putting everyone else first. He wanted it preserved for Cameron's future, for real emergencies. He made me the trustee. The money was supposed to go to you when you turned 65, or to Cameron if something happened to you. Didn't you get the letters from the attorney? My mind raced back through the years. Had there been letters? I'd been so consumed with grief after Richard's death, and then so focused on raising Cameron, working constantly, barely keeping my head above water. Had I missed something? How much money are we talking about, Theodore? Another pause. With the land, the investments, and the insurance payout that's been accumulating interest for over 25 years? Close to $800,000, Brenda. It's yours. It's always been yours. I've been trying to reach you about signing the transfer papers. I sent letters to your old address, but they kept coming back. I was going to call, but life got busy and I kept putting it off. I'm sorry. I should have tried harder. I couldn't breathe. $800,000. All this time while I'd been working myself to exhaustion, eating ramen noodles so Cameron could have decent meals, wearing the same coat for 10 winters, mending my own clothes, taking the bus instead of owning a car, there had been money. Money that Richard had hidden, that Theodore had been managing, that I'd known nothing about. And somehow Rebecca knew about it. Brenda? Are you still there? Theodore's voice brought me back. I'm here, I managed to say. Theodore, how would someone find out about this? If I didn't know, how would anyone else know? Well, it's public record in a way, he explained. The property ownership is registered. The trust documents were filed with the county. If someone was looking, if they hired a private investigator or did a thorough background check, they could piece it together. Why do you ask? I think my daughter-in-law found out about the money, I said slowly. And I think that's why she's been working so hard to push me out of Cameron's life. Theodore was quiet for a moment, and then he sighed. That would explain some things. Brenda, I need to tell you something else. About 3 months ago, I got a call from a woman who said she was representing the Wallace family interests. She asked a lot of questions about the trust, about when the money would be distributed, about what would happen if you passed away before the transfer. I told her I couldn't discuss private financial matters, but she was very persistent. Did she give you a name? She said her name was Jennifer Morrison, but when I tried to call her back at the number she gave me, it was disconnected. I figured it was a scam and forgot about it. But now, hearing what you're telling me, it was probably Rebecca, I said, feeling sick. Or someone she hired. Brenda, you need to come up here. We need to get these papers signed, get everything transferred into your name properly, and you need to talk to the attorney Gregory Hartwell. He's been handling Richard's estate all these years. He can explain everything and help you protect yourself. We made plans for me to drive up the following week. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, my mind trying to process everything I just learned. Richard had protected us, had set aside money for our future, and I'd never known. I'd struggled and suffered and worked myself to the bone, all while sitting on a small fortune. The pieces started falling into place like a terrible puzzle. Rebecca's sudden coldness hadn't started randomly. It had started right around the time I'd mentioned to Cameron that I was going to update my will. It had been a casual conversation over dinner, nothing dramatic. We'd been talking about the future, about Sophie's education, and I'd mentioned that I wanted to make sure my small savings and personal belongings were properly distributed. I told him I wanted to leave everything to him, of course, but also set aside something for Sophie's education. It had been such an innocent conversation. Cameron had laughed and told me not to talk about dying, that I'd be around for years. But Rebecca had gotten very quiet, had asked pointed questions about what exactly I had, what my assets were. I'd brushed it off at the time, thinking she was just being practical. Now I understood. She'd been calculating. She must have done research after that dinner. She must have dug into Cameron's family history, hired someone to investigate the Wallace family finances, discovered the inheritance, and realized that I was sitting on a substantial amount of money. Money that would eventually go to Cameron or perhaps to Sophie. And as long as I was in the picture, as long as I was close to Cameron, I controlled that money. But if I were out of the picture, if Cameron had cut me off completely, if I were to pass away estranged from my son, what would happen to that inheritance? Would Rebecca convince Cameron that I'd abandoned him? Would she paint herself as the dutiful wife who'd protected him from his toxic mother? Would she be there, supportive and loving, when the money finally came through? And there was something else, something darker that I didn't want to think about but couldn't avoid. If I died while estranged from Cameron, would he even come to my funeral? Would he know about my death in time to have any say in my affairs? Or would Rebecca be able to manipulate the situation, maybe even contest the will, arguing that Cameron and I had no relationship at the end? I spent the next week in a fury of research and phone calls. I contacted the attorney Theodore had mentioned, a man named Gregory Hartwell who had an office in Albany. He confirmed everything. The money was mine, had been mine all along. The reason I hadn't received the documents was simple. They'd been sent to the old family home, which I'd sold 2 years ago to help Cameron with his down payment. The new owners had apparently discarded the mail, assuming it was for the previous occupants. "Mrs. Wallace," Gregory said during our first phone call, his voice professional but kind, "I apologize for not following up more diligently. I assumed you'd received the documents and were simply taking your time to review them. I should have reached out directly. Theodore mentioned you only just learned about the inheritance." "That's correct," I said, my voice tight. "My late husband apparently didn't tell me about any of this. He wanted it preserved for later." "That's not uncommon," Gregory assured me. "Many people set up trusts this way, wanting to ensure the money is there for true emergencies or retirement, not for daily expenses. Your husband clearly had your best interests at heart, even if his methods seem questionable in hindsight." We scheduled an appointment for the following week. In the meantime, Gregory sent me copies of all the documents via email. I spent hours reading through them, trying to understand the legal language, the terms of the trust, the conditions Richard had set. He'd thought of everything. The money was structured so that it would transfer to me at 65, which I just turned 3 months ago. If I died before that, it would have gone directly to Cameron in a trust that would have paid out slowly over 20 years, protecting him from making impulsive decisions. Richard had known our son, had known that a sudden windfall might not be good for him. But now the money was mine to do with as I pleased. I could give it all to Cameron immediately if I wanted. I could spend every penny on myself. I could donate it all to charity. The choice was entirely mine. The power of that realization hit me hard. For the first time in my adult life, I had real financial security. I didn't have to worry about my retirement, about medical bills, about whether I could afford to fix my car when it broke down. I could breathe. But the money also represented something darker. Proof that Rebecca had manipulated my relationship with my son for financial gain. She'd isolated me, turned Cameron against me, kept me from my granddaughter, all because of greed. I spent the next month putting my affairs in order. I met with Gregory Hartwell several times, carefully restructuring my will. He was a patient man in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened to my story without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and helped me create a plan that would protect everyone involved. I set up a trust for Sophie, one that would provide for her education and future, but that Rebecca couldn't touch. The trust would pay for college, graduate school if she wanted it, help with a first home purchase, but it would be managed by a third party until Sophie turned 30. That way, even if Rebecca tried to pressure Sophie to access the money early, she wouldn't be able to. I made arrangements for a portion of the money to go to several charities I cared about. The local library where I worked, a scholarship fund for children who'd lost parents, a women's shelter that had helped my friend through a difficult time. It felt good to know that Richard's careful planning would help others, not just our family. And I made sure that Cameron would receive his inheritance, but with conditions that would protect him from making impulsive decisions under Rebecca's influence. The money would go into a trust that would pay out over 15 years, enough for him to benefit from it but not enough that Rebecca could convince him to make a dramatic lifestyle change. Gregory suggested adding a clause that would accelerate the payments if Cameron and Rebecca divorced, which felt both sad and practical. Then I did something that surprised even me. I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds, I know it seems extreme, but I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Was Rebecca simply greedy, or was there more to the story? Did Cameron know about her financial situation? Was he complicit in this, or was he being manipulated too? The investigator's name was Dolores Chun, a former police detective who now ran her own agency. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that inspired confidence. We met at a coffee shop and I told her everything. The estrangement, the overheard conversation, the inheritance, my suspicions. I can look into it, Dolores said, taking notes on a small tablet. It'll take a few weeks, maybe a month, to build a complete picture. I'll need some information from you. Names, dates, any financial documents you have access to. Is this legal? I asked, suddenly worried. I don't want to do anything that could make things worse. Everything I do is completely legal, Dolores assured me. I'll be looking at public records, social media, conducting some interviews with people who know Rebecca professionally. I won't break any laws, I promise. But I will find out the truth. A month later, Dolores called me and asked me to come to her office. When I arrived, she had a folder thick with documents waiting for me. We sat in her small, neat office, and she walked me through what she'd found. Rebecca had significant debts that Cameron knew nothing about. Credit cards maxed out to their limits, personal loans from before their marriage that she'd hidden, even a loan from a payday lending place that charged exorbitant interest. In total, she owed over $90,000, and the monthly payments were crushing her. How has she been hiding this from Cameron? I asked, staring at the credit card statements Dolores had obtained through public record searches. She has a separate bank account that he doesn't know about, Dolores explained. The statements go to a P.O. box. She's been using her bonuses and tax returns to make minimum payments, but she's barely keeping her head above water. Based on what I found, she'll likely have to declare bankruptcy within the next year or two, if something doesn't change. How did she get into this much debt? Dolores pulled out more documents. Shopping addiction mostly. Designer clothes, handbags, shoes. Expensive vacations charged on credit cards. She grew up poor, from what I can tell, really struggled as a kid. Once she started making decent money, she went overboard trying to live a lifestyle she couldn't afford. It's a common pattern, actually. But there was more. Dolores had also uncovered something else. Rebecca had been in contact with a divorce attorney 6 months ago, right around the time she'd started pushing me out of Cameron's life. Not to divorce Cameron, but to understand her rights in case of my death. She'd been asking questions about inheritance laws, about whether a daughter-in-law had any claim to a mother-in-law's estate, about how to maximize her family's share of any money that might come through. She's been planning this, I said, feeling sick. She's been strategizing about how to get the money. It appears that way, Dolores said gently. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wallace. I know this isn't easy to hear. I sat with this information for days, feeling a mix of vindication and heartbreak. I'd been right about Rebecca's motives, but that didn't make it hurt any less that my son had chosen her manipulation over his own mother. Cameron, my sweet boy who used to bring me flowers he'd picked from the neighbor's yard, who used to make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, had cut me out of his life for a woman who saw us both as nothing more than a path to financial security. But there was something else mixed in with the pain. It was anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder and more focused. I'd spent 6 months believing I was the problem, that I'd somehow failed as a mother, that I deserved to be cast aside. Now I knew the truth. I'd been systematically isolated and removed from my son's life, as part of a calculated plan to access money I hadn't even known existed. Do you think my next decision was right or wrong? Tell me in the comments, because even now I sometimes wonder. I decided to bring everything out into the open, but not in the way Rebecca expected. I wasn't going to show up at their house with accusations and evidence. I wasn't going to send angry texts or leave tearful voicemails. I was going to do this properly, with dignity and strength. I contacted Cameron through a certified letter, the kind that requires a signature. I spent hours crafting that letter, writing and rewriting until every word was perfect. In it, I told him I loved him, that I always would, but that I'd respected his wishes for space. I told him I'd recently learned about an inheritance from his father, and that I'd be making decisions about it in the coming weeks. I invited him to meet with me and my attorney to discuss his father's legacy, and to understand what Richard had set up for our family's future. I didn't mention Rebecca. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I simply stated facts and extended an invitation. The ball was in his court. For 2 weeks I heard nothing. I went to work at the library, smiled at patrons, shelved books, and pretended my heart wasn't breaking all over again. I started therapy during this time, talking to a counselor named Dr. Patricia Simmons who specialized in family estrangement. She helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for Cameron's choices, that I could control only my own actions and responses. "You've done everything right," Dr. Simmons told me during one session. "You've respected boundaries while also advocating for yourself. That's a difficult balance, and you should be proud of how you've handled this." Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon while I was organizing the new fiction section, my phone rang. I saw Cameron's name on the screen and nearly dropped the phone. My hands were shaking as I answered. "Mom." His voice sounded small, young, like the boy he used to be. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course," I said, moving to a quiet corner of the library. "I'm at work, but I can talk for a few minutes. Or we could meet somewhere." "Can we meet tomorrow?" he asked. "Just you and me? There's a coffee shop on Maple Street, the one with the blue awning. Can you meet me there at 3? "I'll be there," I promised. That night I barely slept. I rehearsed what I might say, imagined a dozen different scenarios of how the conversation might go. Would he be angry? Defensive? Would Rebecca have coached him on what to say? Or had my letter broken through the wall she'd built between us? We met at the coffee shop halfway between our homes. When Cameron walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted, older than his 32 years. His usually neat hair was disheveled. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he'd lost weight. We sat across from each other at a small table by the window, an awkward silence stretching between us. "Rebecca told me about the letter," he finally said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup like he needed the warmth. "She's been acting strange ever since. Asking a lot of questions about Dad, about his family, about what you might have." "And what did you tell her?" I asked gently, keeping my voice neutral. "I told her I didn't know anything. 'Cause I don't, Mom. I don't understand what's going on. What inheritance? Dad died broke. We struggled for years. So I told him. All of it. About his father's planning, about the money that had been waiting all these years, about Uncle Theodore and the attorney, about the property and the investments and the life insurance that had been accumulating interest for over 2 decades. I watched his face go through a range of emotions. Shock, confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been anger. $800,000, he repeated, his voice rising slightly. An elderly couple at the next table glanced over. All this time, while we were eating spaghetti for dinner 5 nights a week. While you were working yourself sick. Your father wanted to take care of us, I said carefully. He didn't want me to know because he knew I'd use it to buy you better things to make life easier. He wanted it preserved for real emergencies for the future. He knew me too well. If I'd known about that money, I would have spent it all making sure you had every advantage. Cameron's hands were shaking. But you worked so hard. You gave up everything. I could have. You could have what, sweetheart? Not learned the value of hard work? Not understood that success comes from effort and persistence. Your father knew what he was doing. He wanted you to grow up grounded, not entitled. And you did. You became a teacher, someone who gives back to the community. Would you have made the same choices if you'd grown up wealthy? Cameron stared at his coffee, his jaw working. Does Rebecca know about this? I think she found out somehow, I said carefully, choosing my words with precision. And I think it may have influenced some of her decisions about our relationship. I watched my son's face change as the implications sank in. The strange coldness that had come over Rebecca. The sudden insistence that he cut off contact with me. The timing of it all, right after I'd mentioned updating my will. No, he said, shaking his head. No, Rebecca wouldn't. She loves me. She said you were toxic, that you were damaging our marriage, that we needed space. Cameron, I interrupted gently, I'm not going to tell you what to think about your wife. You're a grown man and your marriage is your own. But I will tell you this. I've hired a private investigator, and I've learned some things about Rebecca's financial situation. Things I think you should know. I slid the folder across the table. It was a condensed version of what Dolores had given me, just the most important documents. The credit card statements, the loan documents, the record of Rebecca's consultation with the divorce attorney. Cameron stared at it like it might bite him. You don't have to look at it now, I said. Take it home. Read it when you're ready. But know that whatever you find in there, whatever you decide to do, I'm your mother. I'll always love you. Nothing can change that. And the inheritance your father left? It's mine to do with as I choose. I've already made arrangements for Sophie's education, and for you to receive a portion when the time is right. But I'm not going anywhere, Cameron. Not anymore. I've been quiet for 6 months, respecting boundaries that I now understand were based on manipulation. But I'm done being silent. I stood up to leave, but Cameron grabbed my hand. His grip was tight, desperate. Mom, wait. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I should have defended you. I should have questioned why Rebecca was so insistent about cutting you out. I just wanted to keep the peace. I wanted my wife to be happy. And what about your mother's happiness? I asked, not unkindly. What about respecting the woman who raised you? Tears rolled down his face, and for a moment he was 7 years old again, crying over a broken toy. I messed up. I messed up so badly. I let her convince me that you were the problem, that you were suffocating us. But you weren't. You were just being a mom, just wanting to be part of your grandson's life. Granddaughter, I corrected gently. Sophie. He nodded, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. Granddaughter. God, Mom, she's been asking about you. She asks where Grandma Brenda is, why you don't come over anymore. Rebecca tells her you're busy, but Sophie's smart. She knows something's wrong. My heart clenched. She asks about me? All the time. She looks for you at every family gathering. She made you a birthday card in preschool, and Rebecca told her we'd mail it, but I don't think she ever did. I had to look away, blinking back tears. Sophie remembered me. My granddaughter, who I'd barely gotten to know, who'd been only 2.5 when Rebecca cut me off, still asked about me. Cameron, I want you to read what's in that folder, I said, pulling my hand back gently. I want you to understand what's been happening. And then I want you to make a choice, a real choice based on truth instead of manipulation. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But I won't be pushed aside anymore without knowing why. I left him there with the folder and his thoughts. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in months. I'd spoken my truth. I'd stood up for myself. Whatever happened next was up to Cameron. 3 days later, Cameron showed up at my apartment. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in my pajamas drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. When I opened the door, he looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, still sitting in the car at the curb, I could see Rebecca. Even from a distance, I could see that she'd been crying, her face pale and drawn. I read everything, Cameron said without preamble. The debts, the consultation with the divorce attorney, all of it. We've been talking for 3 days straight, barely sleeping. Can we come in? I hesitated for just a moment. Every instinct told me to slam the door, to protect myself from more hurt. But I stepped aside and let them both enter. Rebecca stood in my small living room, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely vulnerable. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her perfectly styled hair was in a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked young suddenly, younger than her 30 years, like a child caught doing something wrong. Brenda, she started, her voice barely audible. I don't even know where to begin. You have every right to hate me. I don't hate you, Rebecca, I said honestly, and it was true. Somewhere over the past months, I'd moved past hate into something more complex. Disappointment, yes. Hurt, certainly. But not hate. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. But I don't hate you. She started crying then. Real tears that shook her whole body. Cameron put his arm around her, but he was looking at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. Can we all sit down? I asked, gesturing to the couch and chairs. We arranged ourselves awkwardly, Rebecca and Cameron on the couch, me in my reading chair. For a long moment no one spoke. Finally Rebecca said, I grew up poor. Really, really poor. My dad left when I was 3, and my mom worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. We got evicted twice. I wore the same pair of shoes until they literally fell apart. When I was 14, I had to drop out of the dance classes I loved because we couldn't afford them anymore. And I promised myself that when I grew up, when I had money of my own, I'd never feel that way again. She took a shaky breath and Cameron squeezed her hand. So when I finally got a good job, I went crazy with spending. I thought I deserved it after everything I'd been through. But I got in over my head with debt and I was drowning. When I married Cameron, I thought. She trailed off, unable to finish. You thought his family had money that could help, I finished for her. She nodded miserably. And when I found out about the inheritance, I just saw it as the answer to all my problems. I didn't think about what it meant about you as a person. I just saw dollar signs and a way out of the mess I'd made. So you decided to remove me from the equation, I said flatly. I convinced myself you were the problem, Rebecca admitted. And at least she had the grace to look ashamed. I convinced myself that you really were too involved, too controlling. It was easier than admitting I was manipulating the situation. I told Cameron things about you that were exaggerated or taken out of context. I made him feel guilty for wanting to see you. And She started crying harder. I'm so ashamed. I kept Sophie from you. I kept a little girl from her grandmother because I was greedy and desperate. Cameron spoke up, his voice rough. Mom, none of this excuses what we did. What I did. Rebecca's situation doesn't justify cutting you out of my life. I failed you as a son. I let my wife manipulate me, yes, but I also made choices. I chose to believe her version of events. I chose to stop calling you. I chose to miss holidays with you. Those were my decisions and I have to own them. We all sat there for a long moment, the weight of everything hanging in the air. Part of me wanted to forgive them immediately, to hug my son and tell him everything was okay, to welcome Rebecca back into the family with open arms. But the stronger part of me, the part that had grown over these painful months, knew that forgiveness had to be earned. Love without boundaries wasn't healthy love. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and clear. Rebecca, you're going to get help for your spending problem and deal with your debts honestly. I'll give you the names of some financial counselors. Cameron, you're going to learn to stand up for the people you love, even when it's uncomfortable. You're going to work on being less of a people pleaser and more of a man who knows his own mind. They both nodded, looking like scolded children. And both of you are going to understand that I'm not a bank account or an inheritance. I'm a person. I'm your mother, Cameron. And I deserved better than what you gave me. I deserved respect, communication, and honesty. The fact that it took potential money to bring you back into my life? That's something you're going to have to live with. What about the money? Rebecca asked quietly, and I saw Cameron wince at her question. I'd been expecting this. The money is mine, I said firmly. I've made arrangements that I'm comfortable with. Sophie's education is secured in a trust that neither of you can touch. It'll pay for college, graduate school if she wants it, help with a down payment on her first home when she's ready. But it'll be managed by a third party until she's 30. So don't even think about trying to access it for your debts. Rebecca flinched but nodded. Cameron will inherit when I pass, but through a structure that protects him. The money will be paid out over 15 years, managed by a trustee. If you two divorce during that time, the payments accelerate and Cameron receives everything immediately. So if you're thinking this is your ticket out of debt, think again. I'm not, Rebecca said quickly. I mean, I was. Before. But talking to Cameron these past few days, realizing what I almost threw away, what I did throw away. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I know I can't fix this with an apology. I know I've done terrible things. But I want to try. I want to be better. Words are easy, I said. Actions are what matter. You're going to have to prove that you've changed, and that's going to take time. A lot of time. We understand, Cameron said. Mom, we'll do whatever it takes. And as for the rest of the money, I continued, that's my business. I've earned the right to enjoy my own life for once. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent my entire life taking care of other people. Your father, Cameron, my students when I was teaching, patrons at the library. It's time for me to take care of myself. What are you going to do? Cameron asked, and I could hear genuine curiosity in his voice, maybe even a hint of pride. I'm going to live, I said simply. Really live, not just exist. And I meant it. Over the next months, I did things I'd only dreamed about. I enrolled in art classes at the community college, finally pursuing the painting hobby I'd abandoned decades ago. I discovered I had a talent for watercolors, for capturing the way light played across landscapes. My instructor, a kind woman named Beatrice, encouraged me to enter a local art show, and to my shock, I sold 2 paintings. I booked a trip to Italy, something I dreamed about for decades. I spent 3 weeks wandering through Rome, Florence, and Venice, eating incredible food, seeing art that made me cry, and feeling more alive than I had in years. I made friends with other travelers, stayed in small family-run hotels, and learned just enough Italian to get by. When I came back, I moved to a nicer apartment with a balcony where I could grow flowers and herbs. I bought good furniture, not the thrift store cast-offs I'd been making do with for years. I joined a book club that met at a wine bar downtown. I started dating, going on casual coffee dates with men I met through a senior dating app. Nothing serious, but it was nice to feel attractive again, to have someone open doors for me and compliment my smile. I also started therapy in earnest, working through not just the recent estrangement but patterns I'd carried my whole life. Dr. Simmons helped me see that I'd been defining myself through service to others, that I'd made myself small so that everyone else could be comfortable. No more. Cameron and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, takes time to repair. We started with coffee once a week at that same shop where we'd had our first real conversation after the estrangement. At first, the conversations were stilted, awkward. We'd run out of things to say after 20 minutes. But gradually, as weeks turned into months, we learned how to talk to each other again. Not as mother and child in the old pattern, but as 2 adults who cared about each other. Cameron told me about his struggles as a teacher, about the student who'd finally passed his class after failing for 2 years, about the school politics that drove him crazy. I told him about my art classes, my trip to Italy, the man I'd gone on 3 dates with before realizing we had nothing in common. Rebecca worked with a financial counselor I'd recommended, a no-nonsense woman named Sandra who helped her create a realistic budget and a debt repayment plan. Rebecca took on extra freelance work, stopped shopping for anything beyond necessities, and slowly started chipping away at what she owed. She also started therapy, working through her issues around money and scarcity. And gradually, I saw her become more genuine, less desperate. She stopped trying so hard to impress me, stopped with the fake smiles and over-the-top compliments. She started showing me her real self. Funny, sometimes insecure, deeply ashamed of what she'd done but trying to be better. One day, about 8 months after Cameron had shown up at my door with the folder, Rebecca asked if she could meet me for lunch. Just the 2 of us. I agreed, curious about what she wanted. We met at a sandwich shop near her office. Rebecca ordered a simple turkey sandwich and water, not the expensive salad and wine she probably would have ordered a year ago. We made small talk for a few minutes, and then she took a deep breath. I wanted to give you this, she said, sliding an envelope across the table. It's not much, but it's a start. Inside was a check for $500. Rebecca, what? It's part of what I owe you, she interrupted. Not the money, I mean. I owe you so much more than money. But you helped with Cameron and my house down payment. I want to start paying that back. It'll take me years, but I want to do it. You don't have to, I started, but she cut me off. Yes, I do. I need to do this. I need to take responsibility for what I did, and that includes the financial stuff. You gave us that money thinking we were family, thinking I cared about you. And I treated you terribly. So please let me do this. Let me try to make it right. I looked at the check, at this young woman who was trying so hard to be better, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Okay, I said. Thank you, Rebecca. She nodded, blinking back tears. And I wanted to ask you something. Sophie's birthday is next month. Would you come? Would you be willing to be part of her life again? I'd love that, I said, and I meant it. Sophie's 4th birthday party was small. Just family and a few of her preschool friends. When I arrived with a carefully chosen present, a set of watercolor paints and paper so we could paint together, Sophie looked at me for a long moment. I held my breath, wondering if she'd remember me. Then she smiled, a big gap-toothed grin, and said, "Grandma Brenda, Mommy said you were on a big adventure." I looked at Rebecca, who mouthed Italy, and I smiled. "I was," I told Sophie, kneeling down to her level, "and I brought you back something special." We became regulars in each other's lives again, but differently than before. I didn't drop by unannounced. I called first, respected their schedules, understood that they had their own family rhythm. They included me in holidays and special occasions, but I also had my own life, my own plans, my own identity beyond being Cameron's mom. The most beautiful part of all this was my relationship with Sophie. As Cameron and I grew close again, I got to be a grandmother in a real way. Not the hovering, overbearing figure Rebecca had painted me as, but a loving presence in my granddaughter's life. Sophie and I had our special days together, usually every other Saturday. I'd pick her up and we'd go to the park or the children's museum, or we'd stay in and paint together. She was a natural artist, my Sophie. She'd mix colors fearlessly, not worrying if she made mistakes, just creating with pure joy. Watching her, I realized that's what Richard had wanted for me all along. The freedom to create, to live, to make mistakes without fear. About a year after that first coffee shop meeting with Cameron, we all sat down together for Thanksgiving. It was different from the old days, healthier somehow. We were at Cameron and Rebecca's house, but I'd been invited as a guest, not expected to cook everything myself. Rebecca had actually done most of the cooking, and while the turkey was a bit dry and the stuffing a little too salty, it was made with genuine effort and love. We sat around the table, Sophie chattering about her pre-K class, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't the family I'd imagined, but it was real. It was honest. And it was built on a foundation of truth instead of manipulation. "I want to say something," Cameron said, standing up and raising his glass of wine. "I want to thank Mom for not giving up on me, even when I gave her every reason to. For being strong enough to call out what was wrong, and patient enough to let us find our way back. I'm sorry for the time we lost, but I'm grateful for what we've built now." "Hear, hear," Rebecca added, raising her own glass. "And I want to say thank you too, Brenda, for giving me a chance to prove I can be better. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm going to keep trying to earn it anyway." I raised my glass of sparkling cider, my eyes misting. "I'm just glad to be here," I said simply. "That's all I ever wanted. To be here, to be part of your lives." After dinner, while Cameron was putting Sophie to bed, Rebecca and I did the dishes together. It was a comfortable silence, not the tense awkwardness of before. As I handed her a plate to dry, she said quietly, "I paid off my first credit card last week. 3 more to go." "That's wonderful, Rebecca," I said, meaning it. "It feels good," she admitted. "Scary but good. Like I'm finally taking control instead of letting the debt control me." "That's a big step," I acknowledged. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm in therapy twice a week now. My therapist says I was trying to fill an emotional void with material things, trying to prove to myself that I wasn't that poor kid anymore. She's helping me find healthier ways to deal with those feelings." "I'm proud of you," I said, and Rebecca looked at me with surprise. "I am. Change is hard, especially this kind of fundamental change. But you're doing it." She started crying then, right there at the sink with her hands in the soapy water. "I thought I'd lost my chance with you. I thought you'd never forgive me." "I'm working on forgiveness," I said honestly. "Some days are easier than others. But I see you trying, and that matters." Looking back now, 2 years after that terrible day when Cameron told me he had to choose between me and his family, I realized that Rebecca actually did me a favor. Not intentionally, of course. She'd been trying to manipulate and control the situation for her own gain. But in pushing me away, she forced me to see that I'd been living my entire life for other people. My husband Richard, God rest his soul. My son Cameron. My students when I was teaching full-time. My coworkers at the library. My sister Fiona, who was always asking me to babysit her grandkids. I'd never stopped to ask what Brenda wanted, what Brenda needed, what Brenda dreamed about. The inheritance gave me financial freedom, yes. But the real gift was the freedom I gave myself to be more than just a supporting character in someone else's story. I became the main character of my own life. I'm 65 now, and I've never been happier. Last month, I went on a river cruise through Europe with my art class. I've taken up ballroom dancing, something Richard and I used to do when we were young. I'm planning a trip to Greece next spring with my book club. I'm taking a pottery class at the community center. And yes, I'm still dating. I've been seeing a kind man named Raymond for about 6 months now. He's a retired engineer who teaches woodworking classes and treats me like I matter, who doesn't see me as anyone's mother or anyone's wallet, just as Brenda. Every morning when I wake up, I thank my late husband Richard for his foresight. He knew me better than I knew myself. He knew that if I'd had access to that money, I would have spent every penny making sure Cameron had advantages. Instead, Richard protected it so that one day I'd be able to protect myself. And in a strange way, I thank Rebecca too. Not for what she intended to do, but for what she accidentally accomplished. She broke something that needed to be broken, my pattern of defining myself solely through service to others. And from those broken pieces, I built something new and stronger. Cameron and I have dinner together every other week now, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Rebecca and Sophie. We talk about real things. Politics, books, our worries, our dreams. He tells me when he's struggling, and I tell him when I'm frustrated or lonely. We're honest with each other in a way we never were before. Sophie is 6 now in 1st grade and she's my joy. We still paint together every other Saturday, and her room is filled with her creations. She's bold with color, fearless in her creativity, everything I'm learning to be. Last week, she told me she wants to be an artist when she grows up. Just like Grandma Brenda. Rebecca and I will never be close, not in the way I once imagined. There's too much history, too much hurt. But we're civil, sometimes even warm. She's been debt-free for 6 months now. And I can see how much lighter she is, how much more genuine. She works hard at being a good mother to Sophie, at being a better wife to Cameron, at managing her money responsibly. Last month, on the anniversary of the day Cameron had shown up with that folder, Rebecca sent me flowers with a note that said simply, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I cried when I read it, put the flowers in my favorite vase, and let myself feel the full complexity of what I felt. Hurt that still lingered, pride in how far we'd all come, and cautious hope for the future. The will that Rebecca was so concerned about? It's been revised multiple times now, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. I've learned that money can reveal who people really are, for better or worse. And I've structured things in a way that protects everyone, including myself. Cameron knows now that his inheritance isn't guaranteed by my death, but by our relationship and his worthiness to receive it. Rebecca knows that her future security depends on building genuine relationships, not manipulating them. And Sophie will grow up with a trust fund for her education, along with a grandmother who teaches her that self-respect is worth more than any bank account. Gregory Hartwell, my attorney, has become a friend. We have lunch every few months, and he helps me navigate not just the legal aspects of the inheritance, but also the emotional ones. He lost his own mother to Alzheimer's last year, and we bonded over our shared understanding of how complicated family can be. Uncle Theodore calls every Sunday now. We talk about everything and nothing. The weather, his woodworking projects, my art classes, family history. He's told me stories about Richard that I never knew, about how my husband had worried constantly about providing for us, about how he'd worked extra hours to make sure that insurance policy was paid, about how he'd loved me so much he wanted to protect me even after he was gone. Richard would be proud of you, Theodore told me last month. You've done exactly what he hoped you'd do. You've taken care of yourself. You've lived. I wish he could see it, I said, feeling the old grief rise up. Oh, I think he can, Theodore said softly. I think he's watching and I think he's smiling. As for me, I'm planning that trip to Greece I mentioned. I'm going with 2 women from my book club, Janet and Rosemary, who've become dear friends. We're going to see the Parthenon, visit the islands, eat amazing food, and celebrate being alive. I'm also thinking about taking a creative writing class next semester. Maybe I'll write my story, all of it, the pain and the triumph. Maybe it'll help someone else who's going through something similar. So was I right to handle things the way I did? Tell me what you think in the comments. Would you have forgiven them faster? Would you have cut them off completely? Would you have given them the money to help with Rebecca's debts? Would you have done something different? All I know is that I did what felt right for me. I stood up for myself when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I demanded respect when it would have been simpler to accept crumbs. I chose myself when the world had trained me to choose everyone else first. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. We can't control how other people treat us. We can't force them to value us or love us or respect us. But we can control how we respond. We can choose to believe we're worthy of better. We can choose to walk away from situations that diminish us. We can choose at any age to become the main character of our own story. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever felt like your only value is what you can give to others, if you've ever been pushed aside by someone who wanted what you had, know this. It's never too late to take your power back. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to choose yourself. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. Those months when Cameron wouldn't speak to me were the darkest of my life. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I'd made the right choice, if I should have just accepted the estrangement quietly. There were moments when I almost called him, almost begged him to let me back into his life on any terms. But I didn't. I held firm. I chose my dignity over my desperation. And that choice changed everything. The inheritance was the catalyst, yes. It brought the truth to light, exposed the manipulation, forced everyone to confront reality. But the real transformation wasn't about the money. It was about me finally understanding that I had value beyond what I could provide for others. That I deserved respect not because I'd earned it through sacrifice, but simply because I was a human being worthy of basic dignity. That's the lesson I hope Sophie learns from all of this. Not that money is important, but that standing up for yourself is. That you teach people how to treat you. That love without respect isn't really love at all. That it's okay to have boundaries even with family. Especially with family. Next week is Sophie's school play. She's playing a flower in the spring pageant. And she's so excited. I'll be there in the front row with Cameron and Rebecca, cheering her on. Afterward we'll go for ice cream, and Sophie will probably get chocolate sauce all over her costume, and we'll laugh about it. It's these ordinary moments that matter most, I think. Not the big dramatic confrontations or revelations, but the simple joy of being present for the people you love. Of being valued and included. Of knowing you belong. I almost lost this. If I'd stayed silent, if I'd accepted the estrangement as something I deserved, if I'd let Rebecca's manipulation go unchallenged, I wouldn't be here now. I'd still be sitting alone in my apartment, wondering what I'd done wrong, slowly fading away from grief and loneliness. Instead, I'm alive. Really truly alive in a way I haven't been since Richard died. Maybe in a way I've never been, if I'm being completely honest. So thank you, Rebecca, for trying to push me out. Thank you for showing me that I needed to fight for myself. Thank you for being the catalyst that forced me to change. I don't think you meant to do me a favor, but you did. And thank you, Richard, wherever you are. Thank you for loving me enough to plan for my future. Thank you for knowing me well enough to protect that money from my own self-sacrificing tendencies. Thank you for giving me the gift of security in my later years so that I could finally learn to put myself first. Most of all, thank you to myself. For being strong enough to stand up. For being brave enough to demand better. For being wise enough to know that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and that love doesn't require martyrdom. I'm Brenda, and this is my story. Not Cameron's mother's story, though I'm proud to be his mom. Not Sophie's grandmother's story, though I cherish that role. My story about a woman who almost let herself be erased, but who chose instead to become visible. To become valued. To become, finally, fully herself. If you like this story, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to get more stories from me. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself. Comment below with your thoughts, your own stories, your advice. I read every comment, and your words mean the world to me. With love and respect, Auntie Helen Stories.